If you ask the average person who plays video games what they think about Assassin's Creed Odyssey, they will probably have at least a somewhat positive opinion of the game. I mean, the Steam reviews currently sit at 89% positive. However, if you ask a die-hard fan of Assassin's Creed what they think about Odyssey, you are bound to hear something much more negative. I mean, just take a look at other reviews of Odyssey on YouTube by Assassin's Creed YouTubers and video makers. So many people hate Odyssey with a burning passion. And in this video, I will go over most of the reasons why people hate Odyssey, but also why I love it so much, and why I consider it to be my favorite in the series. The first and most obvious reason why it's so hated is because this isn't really Assassin's Creed. You don't play as an assassin, there are no Templars, at least not in the usual sense. The modern day is very lacking. You don't even have a hidden blade, and this is one of the only major complaints about this game that nobody can really argue, which is why I decided to bring it up first. Yes, this isn't really Assassin's Creed, and many people say that this game would be a lot better if it didn't share that name with the rest of the franchise, but at the same time, this game does borrow a lot of tropes from Assassin's Creed. The stealth, the naval combat, the Isu, a story about an evil group of people that plan to control the world. And this puts this game in a rather interesting place. It doesn't really have anything to do with the rest of the Assassin's Creed timeline, and yet it still wants to borrow all of these tropes from Assassin's Creed. While yes, part of the reason this even was called Assassin's Creed was to sell more copies, I believe that there simply isn't a solution to this problem that doesn't involve scrapping or reworking the game entirely, which I don't think is a good solution. So yes, this is a quote-unquote Assassin's Creed game, whether you like it or not. And for someone who is a diehard fan of the series, this can be a pretty hard thing to work around. But once you do, you'll find a game that may not be important to the rest of the franchise, but a beautiful game nonetheless. And what better place to start with? The world. Another common criticism that you will hear about this game is that the world is too large and many of the locations feel the same. I could not disagree more. I personally love the size of the world. This game is ultimately aiming to deliver an odyssey, a journey, and the size of the world helps with this aim. Traveling from island to island, city to city until you've explored almost all of Greece creates a feeling of scale that I don't see in many other games. Your journey and quest in this game genuinely feels massive, and exploring these isles is such a joy. And sure, there's definitely some towns that look the same here and there, but this did not hinder my enjoyment at all, because as many alike towns as there is an equal amount of gorgeous, unique, and memorable locations too. The large, sprawling city of Athens with the golden statue of Athena, the massive temples and structures in Sparta, Kefalonia with its unmistakable Zeus statue, the sprawling golden fields of Corinthia, the cliffs and beaches of Mykonos, the large desert plains of Messara, the ongoing construction of Macedonia, the forests of Phokis, and so much more. While many aspects of this game may be lacking in one way or another, the world is quite possibly the one piece of this game that I would consider flawless, even with its similar-looking towns and abundance of side content. And speaking of side content, yes, there is too much. There is so much that I don't think I'll ever see all of it. Hundreds of locations, dozens of side quests, world events, conquest battles. I mean, if you want a game to give you your money's worth, look no further. And many might say that the amount of side content results in a lower quality of side content, and at times you would be right. There are 100% side quests here that are like very obviously copied and pasted with tedious fetch quest tasks. But at the same time, even the best of the best open worlds have copied and pasted side content. And Odyssey absolutely still has some fantastic side content and quest lines, particularly the Rebel quest line on Mykonos, the Daughters of Artemis quest line, Marcos' quest line, and of course the Family Values quest. Yes, after 50 hours of play, the monotonous side quests start to get on your nerves more than ever, but don't let that distract from the amount of well-written and genuinely amazing side content that lies in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. But the world has more to offer than just side quests and gorgeous sights. Something that this game has, that many other games and worlds often strive for but never quite achieve, is atmosphere. Atmosphere is really the X factor of video game open worlds. That's something that keeps you coming back, and Odyssey has it. The wonderful soundtrack that plays as you're exploring its vast world, the large cities and crowds of people all working on something, conversating, or partying. But it isn't just the atmosphere, it's the history too. Yes, many areas and events are largely exaggerated, but what's here is still amazing. Seeing the Battle of Thermopylae, the Plague of Athens, and the Peloponnesian War honestly turned me into a bit of a nerd for ancient Greek history. There's even the Discovery Tour where you get to learn about what the life was like back in ancient Greece, as well as many events and important people that occurred during that time. Seeing a little mode such as this just shows the level of passion that the developers have for this time period. Yes, Origins had it first, but the amount of work that went into this little side mode is even more evidence for me that the developers genuinely care and wanted to craft a beautiful ancient Greek setting, and they absolutely succeeded. But setting is more than a location, it's a time period as well. And in this specific period of ancient Greece, we witnessed the Peloponnesian War, Athens versus Sparta, and this war is heavily weaved into the main story of Odyssey. Everywhere you look, you'll see Athenian ships warring with Spartan ones, or soldiers fighting out in the woods, as well as conquest battles that you can take part in. And these conquest battles are a ton of fun, although I do think they could have been dramatized a bit more. Show a cutscene of both sides charging at each other at the start of each conquest battle, for instance. But that is a tiny flaw compared to a much larger one to do with the same mechanic. This war doesn't matter. You play as a Spartan man or woman who has a Spartan family that is very important to the story. However, you can easily infiltrate a Spartan fort, go destroy a Spartan ship, or side with the Athenians in a conquest battle, and then go work with your Spartan family the next moment during the story, and they have absolutely nothing to say about it. If you want to give the player an option between siding with Athens or Sparta, then either have it change the outcome of your story or at least serve a purpose long term. Or don't write a story where you spend the majority of it helping your Spartan family. Now sure, there is a bit of narrative wiggle room here. Your character doesn't exactly have a great relationship with Sparta as a nation because of circumstances that happened during the story, which might give the player an excuse for siding with Athenians. But this doesn't change the fact that this feature is not fleshed out in the slightest. You have a story where you have a Spartan family and Athenian friends, and you help both and work with both throughout the story, and nobody has anything to say about it. Imagine if your allegiance determined whether certain people would stand by your side or leave you. Maybe Herodotus has decided that you've helped too many Spartans, and he decides to not work with you anymore. Or even your own family members decide that they want nothing to do with you because you haven't been loyal to the nation that you grew up in. This would not only create stakes for the story, but would also help further tell a narrative about how war can tear relationships apart. But unfortunately, this potential was not realized, and it results in a world that is absolutely breathtaking to look at, has some amazing and memorable side quests, and a strong feeling of exploration, but a war that doesn't mean anything for both the story and environment around you. All it does is change the armor of the soldiers that you kill, which is a shame. But, while this is a massive issue with the game, and one that might ruin the immersion for some, it didn't for me. I still absolutely adore this world. It's without a doubt the main selling point of Odyssey, and despite its issues, I love it to death. And it's ultimately what keeps me coming back time and time again. One thing that Odyssey commits to that sets it apart from many other Assassin's Creed titles is its commitment to an RPG framework. Let's start by looking at the way that Odyssey lets you roleplay within its story. Firstly, this is the first Assassin's Creed to offer dialogue options. Different dialogue options have different implications and tones indicated by certain icons. A threaten or attack symbol is shown by a red hand symbol or swords. The option to lie is shown by a scale, and of course, this wouldn't be an RPG if you couldn't flirt with people too, so that's also there, shown by a heart symbol. But how do these dialogue options affect your journey? When it comes to side quests, a lot of them will usually end with you deciding whether or not a specific side character lives or dies. On paper, this is quite a dramatic decision, because someone's life is in your hands, but because this is a one-time side quest and you will never see these characters again regardless of your decision, it ends up being quite shallow. At times, during a side quest, you might have the option to obtain a piece of information through various ways. You can bribe people, threaten them, or simply do whatever task it is they are asking you to do. While this does slightly change up your approach to how you complete a quest, it rarely affects the actual outcome of that quest, and will rather just slightly change certain dialogue options. But when it comes to the main quest, it gets a bit more complicated. This game has 9 different endings, and of course, how you get these different endings is determined by your choices. I have done 2 playthroughs of this game, one on PC and another on PS5 in preparation for this review. And there was about 3 years in between those 2 playthroughs, so my mind was quite foggy on some of the details and which dialogue options counted towards my ending and which didn't. But instead of looking it up online, I just went with it and chose whatever felt appropriate to me, and I actually ended up getting 2 entirely different endings across both those playthroughs. Those 9 different endings range heavily from being quite similar to extremely different. Sometimes the only thing that can separate one ending from another is one character lives and another one dies, and the choices that determine these endings can sometimes be few and far between, but that doesn't mean that they aren't memorable or present. I'll give you an example without spoiling anything. Early on in my playthrough, I was faced with a choice whether to kill or spare a certain character that is important to the story. I chose to spare them, and about 20 hours later into my playthrough, I was preparing to fight another character to the death, when all of a sudden, the person that I spared shows up to break up the fight. Had I not spared them, they would not have been there to stop the fight, which would have led to me killing this other character. While this choice did affect my ending, it also affected my journey as I was progressing through the story. From the moment that you boot up the game, you are making a choice, deciding whether or not you will play as Alexios or Cassandra. For both my playthroughs, I decided to play as Cassandra as I originally heard that she had the better voice actor, which is true. And for my second playthrough, I didn't really want to switch it up because I'd already become so used to playing as Cassandra, so I kind of just stuck with her. And while this choice doesn't affect the story itself, it will affect who you'll be seeing on screen for your entire playthrough. While there are many choices that do strongly affect your playthrough, I'll be honest, there are a lot of choices that don't matter at all, and in some rare cases won't even result in a different response from the person that you're talking to. So when asking the question, do choices matter in Odyssey, the answer is mostly no, sometimes extremely. But dialogue options aren't the only aspect of the RPG framework at play here. There are also varying playstyles and weapon types, stats, and skill points, and in this aspect, Odyssey nails it. There are 3 main playstyles featured in Odyssey: Warrior, Hunter, and Assassin, focused on combat, ranged, and stealth respectively. For my first playthrough, I mostly put my points into the Warrior tree, and I had a great experience. I mostly stuck with my standard swords and used a ton of loud, heavy abilities, fulfilling that Spartan fantasy. But the second time around, I spec'd more into the Assassin tree, playing the game in a stealthier and more considerate way, and I had an equally fun experience, yet a very different one. In my original playthrough, since I had put so much points into the Warrior tree, whenever I would attempt to take a certain area by stealth, I would never be able to one-hit assassinate any of the enemies, and I would get spotted every time I tried. But this time around, that was never an issue. I was assassinating every last enemy I saw, with the trade-off of not being as strong in hand-to-hand combat. However, if you want to express yourself in any given playstyle, you can as well. So many of the armor sets in this game look absolutely fantastic, and they all come with their own engravings, which are basically stat bonuses. But what if you like how a certain armor set looks, yet you don't like its stats? Maybe it doesn't quite fit your build, and there's another armor set that fits that playstyle better. Well, no worries. This game has a transmog system, which basically allows you to make any piece of armor look like any other piece so long as you have unlocked it or discovered it. And the great part about this is that it comes at no extra cost. You can do this whenever, wherever, and it makes for a much more liberating and freeing customization experience. You never feel like you are forced to use anything you don't like simply because of its stats, and that's amazing. However, one issue that I have with the gear is that, like the quests, there's just too much. For my second playthrough, I made a conscious effort to make sure that I am always dismantling and selling gear that I don't need, because if you don't do this, then you'll be hitting that max carry weight real quick. But the carry weight isn't the only issue. It's also the fact that because of the sheer amount of gear that you are unlocking, it gives you less time to grow attached to the gear that you already have. So while the sheer variety of gear coupled with this transmog system allows incredible freedom for customization, it does mean that you'll probably be switching through gear at a rapid pace. Some may like this, others may not. I personally think it's a worthwhile trade-off for the freedom of customization that you gain in return. And on the plus side, once you reach the higher levels, there are certain armor sets that are more memorable, and you can spend some currency and resources to level up that gear to your level if you choose to hold on to a specific set. Overall, whether you like it or not, this is an RPG game. But unlike Origins, which slightly began dipping its toes into the RPG framework, or Valhalla, which tried to kind of shy away from it, this game commits to it. It doesn't attempt to please both the old fans and the new, and it isn't ashamed to be completely different from the older games. And I believe that it is in this commitment to being an RPG that makes it so replayable and fresh. Because no matter how you feel about this game, you can't deny that there is no other game quite like it in the series. Now let's circle back to stealth and combat. One thing that really surprised me on the second playthrough was just how much fun the stealth was. Don't get me wrong, it isn't on the level of certain full-blown stealth games, and I wouldn't quite say that it's the best in the series, but it's certainly in that conversation. Is it realistic? Absolutely not. You have some really wild and sci-fi-esque abilities. I mean, the rush assassination lets you teleport from enemy to enemy, and even though there is a slight story explanation for why you're able to do all of this, it isn't quite enough to suspend my disbelief at times. But man, does it make for a fun stealth experience. The enemy AI is actually relatively smart and forces you to consider many actions during stealth. If you're infiltrating a fort, you better hide every dead body, because if somebody finds one, they will go and light the brazier, which is this game's version of an alarm. But if you think far enough ahead, you can make it to the brazier first before anyone spots you and set a trap. So if someone goes to light it, they die, and the brazier becomes unusable afterwards. And as previously mentioned, there are plenty of abilities that complement the stealth playstyle heavily. The rush assassination, as ridiculous as it is a lot of fun to pull off, and when used smartly, can get you out of a sticky situation. You can use it to take out multiple guards at once as long as they are in a relatively close proximity, but you can also use it to quickly take out a guard that is about to spot you and is too far for a standard assassination. You've also got the critical assassination, which can be used to take out stronger enemies that are a bit too strong for a standard assassination, or you've got abilities like the Shadow of Nyx or Vanish that are great for a quick escape. But that's just a stealth tree. If you intend on staying undetected, certain hunter abilities complement this playstyle quite well, such as the Predator Shot or the Devastating Shot. As for combat, it's a bit more bare bones. You've got your standard attack, heavy attack, dodge, roll, and parry. However, something quite interesting that I've noticed about this game's combat is how it handles dodges and parries. Let's compare Odyssey's combat system to a traditional combat system with these same mechanics. In a traditional combat system, you might have a block, which is used to block most if not all damage, but at the cost of maybe some stamina or the ability to counterattack. But you'll also have a parry, which is a well-timed block that stuns the enemy and allows you to attack back at the cost of risking messing up the timing window. Do it too early or too late, and you get hit. And you'll also have dodges, which are a safe but reliable way of avoiding damage and allowing yourself to reposition. So now that we've looked at a traditional combat system, let's look at Odyssey. Firstly, there is no block button at all. There is only a parry. But because a parry is a traditionally risky option and there is no non-risky alternative in the form of a block, they made the parry timing window extremely generous. I can hit the parry button a whole second before an attack lands, and it will still parry that attack. In addition to this, every enemy attack will have a little glint on their weapon indicating that you have to parry. And if you have multiple enemies attacking you at once, one parry is enough to stun all of them. While this might make the parry seem extremely overpowered, it actually isn't. Enemies will often have unblockable attacks that cannot be parried and must be dodged. And many times, enemies will dodge backwards after you land a parry, not allowing you to follow up on that counter window, and will force you to land multiple parries in order to actually counterattack. So because of all this, the parry actually ends up being relatively balanced. But now let's look at the dodge. Instead of just a traditional dodge, you can both dodge and roll. Rolling lets you cover more distance and avoid damage easier, but in turn positions you quite far away from the enemy, which doesn't quite give you a chance to fight back. And dodging covers a much shorter distance, but keeps you close to the enemy after their attack. But here's the really interesting part. If you dodge at just the right moment, time will slow down around you, giving you a great window to counterattack your enemy. And because every attack can be dodged, both blockable and unblockable attacks, it creates this risk-reward factor when attempting to go for a perfect dodge. If you do it too early, you miss the window, and if you do it too late, you get hit. Do you notice something? In Odyssey, the parry functions more like a traditional dodge, and the dodge/roll functions more like a traditional block/parry. And I believe that the reason this game slightly switches up the combat in this way is because of the fact that you are often fighting multiple enemies at once, and giving you this window of slowing down time allows you to reposition yourself and counterattack easily, whereas the parry is more of a defense mechanism. I also believe that this was done in order to have parries be a more frequent action of the player. Usually performing a parry is a risky maneuver that involves you mastering the timing of a certain attack, but here it's common practice. So overall, you have a system that is quite familiar yet different. As it stands, this wouldn't be enough to uphold 50 plus hours of main quest. But like the stealth and hunter abilities, there are combat abilities here too. A lot of them in fact. The Spartan Kick, which was always great fun, the Bull Rush, the Battle Cry of Ares, Shield Breaker, Ring of Chaos, and of course the Overpower attacks, are all great abilities that help spice up combat and keep it fun and exciting for the whole playthrough. In fact, most of these abilities can be upgraded multiple times, and once you reach the max tier of 3 for any given ability, it not only becomes stronger, but will slightly change the move. For instance, look at the standard Bull Rush compared to the tier 3 Bull Rush. This combat certainly isn't on the level of some other fantastic combat systems, but what's here is serviceable and fun enough to keep you entertained during your entire playthrough. However, what helps keep the system fresh is the variety of weapons at your disposal. You have swords, daggers, staffs, heavy-bladed weapons, heavy blunt weapons, and of course, spears. While any ability you might use functions the same with any weapon apart from the overpower attacks, these weapons all feel distinct and have their own unique pros and cons. Some take longer to swing yet do more damage, and some are a lot quicker yet do less damage per swing. Some heavy attacks are more focused on one enemy, and some are more focused on crowd control with larger sweeping attacks. I will say that one minor issue that I have with the weapon variety is the spear. Not the spear weapon type, mind you, no. The broken spear that you carry throughout the game. It's what you'll be using to perform your abilities as well as assassinate targets, and it holds some strong narrative value. However, I do think that the inclusion of this broken spear holds back the full potential of the weapon variety, as you are forced to use it as long as you aren't using a two-handed weapon. What I'm saying is, I want to use a spear and shield, like a real Spartan, and I can't because there are no shields in this game unlike there was in Origins, and that is largely because they had to make room for the broken spear. I'm not saying cut it, I'm just saying I wish they had made more of an effort in ensuring that it doesn't hold back the weapon variety, and I think it does. But what about the system that holds all of this together? The adrenaline. If you want to use any of the abilities that have been previously mentioned, then you'll need to fill up a bar of adrenaline. During combat, adrenaline fills by landing attacks on enemies, parries, perfectly timed dodges, and hitting enemies with arrows as well. Once you fill up one bar of adrenaline successfully, you can use one of your abilities. However, certain abilities, such as the overpower attacks, do an insane amount of damage yet require 3 adrenaline bars. But this is just for open combat. Adrenaline matters in stealth too. As long as you are undetected, your adrenaline bar will fill automatically, however, only up until the first bar. Stealth abilities also cost 1 adrenaline bar, including the critical assassination. This is important because once you reach a high enough level or even are attempting to take on a fort that is slightly stronger than you, you will most likely face a lot of enemies that won't simply die from a standard assassination, but a critical assassination might do the trick. However, since it uses an adrenaline bar, you'll need to be patient in between assassinations and make sure that bar is fully charged. But who likes being patient? If you find a weaker enemy, as in a standard-looking Spartan or Athenian soldier, you can most likely one-hit assassinate them as long as they are somewhat close to your level. And if you land a one-hit assassination without using a critical assassination or any other ability, then you'll get 3 bars of adrenaline, and now you have some room to pull off some of those other abilities. This entire game's combat and stealth runs on this adrenaline system. Some might even argue that it's a slave to this system, and I will say that this game does have a strong reliance on it. It doesn't hinder the combat or stealth experience, and in some ways, it forces you to think more carefully about your combat or stealth. But if you want to slaughter some Athenians, then doing it on foot isn't your only option. Assassin's Creed Odyssey brings the return of naval exploration and combat. While Black Flag may have been the first to do it, I believe that Odyssey's naval combat rivals that of Black Flag. You've got 2 main weapons here, arrows and javelins. Arrows have longer range yet do less damage, and javelins are the opposite, dealing strong damage up close. You've also got the ability to ram other ships. If you hold down the ramming speed button and there's a ship that has its side exposed, then you're in luck. You also get quite a bit of resources for doing this, particularly wood. But back to your standard weapons. Remember adrenaline? Yeah, it's back here too. Again, you gain it by doing damage to other ships and such, and once you gain a bar of adrenaline, you can apply fire to whichever weapon you choose to use. And if you save up enough adrenaline and hit a ship with multiple flaming attacks, it can eventually catch on fire, dealing damage over time. If you want to avoid damage, then you can also command your crew to brace for impact. This won't completely avoid damage, but you'll take a small fraction of the damage that you otherwise would have. Unfortunately, that's about it when it comes to your weapons during naval combat, which is a bit disappointing, especially when you compare it to the likes of Black Flag, which had a lot more tools at your disposal. But I think what really makes the system rival that of Black Flag's is the lieutenant system as well as the upgrade system. Once you upgrade the hull of your ship enough times, you will be able to hold 4 lieutenants on your ship at any given time. And in order to recruit a lieutenant, well, you have a few ways. The most common way is, while you're infiltrating a fort, find a commander or pole march, but instead of killing them, knock them out non-lethally, and then you can recruit them to your ship. But this doesn't necessarily need to be in a fort or a bandit camp. I mean, I was once fighting a mercenary, I'll talk more about the mercenaries later, and I landed the final blow with a Spartan kick. However, since that is a non-lethal attack, he was knocked out instead of killed, and I was able to recruit him. Basically, any enemy that you knock out, you can recruit to your ship, which is amazing. And each lieutenant comes with their own perks and bonuses. Some might have increased rowing speed, and some might recharge your arrow volleys quicker. However, some lieutenants can even be recruited through certain quest lines. You may occasionally have the option to offer recruitment to certain quest givers, and they have the choice of joining you or not, and sometimes they may even need some convincing. This is a really immersive system that further pushes player expression and freedom, and that's one of the reasons why I think that this naval combat system is just so good. And as previously mentioned, you can also upgrade the ship itself. You'll need to upgrade the hull, but you can also upgrade the speed and damage of your arrows and javelins, how quickly your adrenaline will fill, ramming damage, as well as rowing speed. And the nice thing about this is each upgrade also provides a small visual change to your ship, which gives you a nice visual representation of your growth and your upgrades. On top of that, you can also customize the sails of your ship, the figurehead, and the crew members. I personally love how naval combat and exploration was implemented in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. And as previously mentioned, having your own ship helps create the sense of scale and grandiosity to your exploration, the world, and the story. When I first began my very first playthrough and I started out on Kefalonia, I was enthralled. Meeting characters like Marcos and Phoebe, helping around the island, and then getting into some shady dealings with who I would later learn is a member of an ancient cult, was just so immediately immersive, and I could not wait to see where this story would go. Strictly from a writing standpoint, Odyssey isn't quite the strongest in the series and definitely does not have the strongest characters. I felt much more connected to Edward, Ezio, Arno, and Bayek than Cassandra and other characters in Odyssey. But ultimately, what really kept me coming back and what made me enjoy this story so much was not only the choice and consequence, but the sheer number of revelations and plot twists at play here. It really feels like you are playing through an ancient Greek epic. But let's dive a bit deeper into the characters. I will admit, Odyssey does fall somewhat short. I really don't like Layla, and in fact, I think this whole RPG trilogy of Origins, Odyssey, and Valhalla really failed to create an interesting narrative for Layla. And it's a shame because at one point, the modern day was extremely integral to the experience of Assassin's Creed, and while it is here, it's just not very interesting. Although, when looking at the actual story in the ancient Greek setting, there are plenty of characters that I found captivating in the main quest, particularly Nikolaos, Brasidas, and Pericles. And there's also plenty of characters that I found just simply entertaining, such as Barnabas, Stentor, and Phoebe. And something worth pointing out is the voice acting in this game, for the most part, is amazing, although the lip syncing can at times be god-awful and actually ruin certain scenes. It's that bad. But where this game's story really shines is in the way it delivers information to you. I won't go into spoilers in this review, but I will say that you will be hit with massive plot revelations constantly. And these large, grand moments are some of the highlights of the main quest. But something to note is that on my second playthrough, these large, grand moments weren't the moments that stood out to me nearly as much. Of course, the first time around, these large, impactful moments were extremely memorable, and I couldn't believe my eyes as I watched some of them unfold. But they were so memorable that I already knew what to expect the second time around. I knew what was going to happen and when. No, the moments that really stood out to me were some of the quieter moments that slipped my mind after years of originally playing through the main quest. Moments such as arriving in Athens and seeing the effects of the plague on the city, meeting with Socrates and helping him out with his questline, Xenia's questline, tracking down Chrysis, and helping the two kings of Sparta while also trying to figure out which one of them is corrupt and working under the influence of the cult. Who is this cult, you ask? Nicknamed the Cult of Cosmos, they are essentially an early version of the Templars that you will see in the later installments of the franchise, and they are shrouded in mystery. Getting to learn more and more about who is behind the cult and why they have such an interest in you specifically was extremely entertaining, and I would always be left wanting more every time that you have an encounter with the cult or one of their members during the main quest. They're even weaved into the gameplay side of things. As early on, you are greeted with a detective board of sorts, showcasing all of the members of the cult, both masked and unmasked, and it is your job to use certain clues in the world of Greece in order to hunt them all down. In terms of the actual main quest design, there are also a few minor issues here too. When you first boot up the game, you will be given an option to play in guided mode or exploration mode. I chose exploration mode on both playthroughs, and I do believe that it is the better way to play the game, although it doesn't change as much as you might think. Generally, during a quest, you will be tasked with finding something or someone. With guided mode, it will place a marker on the map telling you exactly where they are, and in exploration mode, it won't show you a marker per se, but it will tell you in a line of text roughly where they are on the map. And by roughly, I mean almost exactly where they are, not leaving much room for actual exploration. As for the details of the main quest, it's hard to go into detail without spoiling anything, so I'll leave it at that. The main quest of Odyssey lacks some of the deep character development of older games in the series, but it more than makes up for it in shocking and gripping plot twists, exciting moments, and entertaining characters. If there is any aspect of Assassin's Creed that only seems to get worse with time, it's parkour. It's originally what set Assassin's Creed apart from so many other franchises. You can find other stealth games, other action-adventure games, other games with good stories, other good open worlds, but finding another good parkour system, now that's quite rare. And there was a time when Assassin's Creed had that. Assassin's Creed 1 with its vaulting mechanic, the Ezio trilogy with its hook blade and side ejects, even Unity with its flashy animations, albeit horrible controls. But here in Odyssey, parkour is a shell of what it once was. It is merely a way to traverse the world and nothing more. Ejects are gone, diagonally climbing is gone, even the flashy animations are gone. All it is now is pushing the stick forward and holding X. There's even an ability that you unlock at level 25 that lets you avoid all fall damage. Yes, past a certain point, there is no fall damage whatsoever. You can jump off a cliff and land at the bottom safely. It completely removes the risk factor of climbing that really tall tower or cliffside. This is one of the issues of Odyssey that genuinely impacted my experience. I can personally look past some of the repetitive quest design, certain choices not having much impact, and a bloated gear game. But this is one of the issues that actually gets to me, because I love parkour. It's one of the reasons why I love the franchise so much, and as gorgeous as this world is, sometimes moving through it can be a bit of a pain, and a reminder of how far this franchise has strayed from its roots. Now, because this is an RPG, and because you are in a large, sprawling open world, naturally you have the option to commit a few crimes. However, these crimes don't go unpunished. Another one of my favorite systems in this game is the mercenary system. Once you commit enough crimes or killings, your wanted bar will go up, and if it reaches a certain point, a mercenary will be sent after you to kill you. Mercenaries are tough, boss-like encounters, and if you let your meter get high enough, then multiple mercenaries can end up tracking you down and attempting to claim your bounty. In order to have this meter go down, you can either find people who have placed a bounty on you and kill them, hide and wait for your bounty to eventually drop, or simply pay it off. The one issue that I have with this system is that in order to pay off your bounty, all you need to do is hit the pause button to open up the menu, and then hold the button to pay it off. You don't need to go to a specific location, you just open the map and pay for it. Simple as that. While this does somewhat trivialize this system, it doesn't ruin it entirely. Fighting these mercenaries is still a ton of fun, and you have the potential to unlock some really worthwhile loot if you are able to take them down. And since you play as a mercenary, there is a sort of mercenary ladder that you must climb, where you can eventually become the strongest mercenary in Greece. I will say, some of the ways that this bounty can be raised is a bit inconsistent and doesn't account for context. For instance, you can raise your bounty by stealing or killing people. Sounds pretty obvious enough. In fact, the system actually helps encourage stealth, because then nobody will see you commit the crimes, and therefore you won't raise your bounty. However, there was a moment during my playthrough where I was infiltrating a fort by stealth, and there were some prisoners held captive, so I freed them, and then I stole something in front of one of them, and then my bounty got raised. It's hard to develop a system like this without having a few instances that just don't make sense. But I do believe that more of an effort could have been made to account for these contextual situations in order to make the system more immersive. Still, fighting mercenaries was cool, and I really enjoyed the feeling of being hunted down by them, and I hope that we see something else like the system in the future. Wrapping up, what's here, in my opinion, is great. You have a gorgeous world with beautiful sights, a fun combat system, great RPG mechanics, great armor sets, weapon variety, stealth, combat, a nice story with some characters that are pretty entertaining, and for each aspect of this game that I love, you can always find a flaw somewhere hidden there. The combat is great, but it's a bit bare bones. The story is great, but the characters aren't as great as some other entries in the series. The world is great, yet some of the content is copy-pasted and a bit repetitive. But, in my personal opinion, a lot of these flaws I am able to look past, and I really urge a lot of people to give this game a chance. Yes, this is not Assassin's Creed, and I understand why so many people do not want to give this game another chance, because it isn't what they expected. I cannot in good faith say that this is the best Assassin's Creed game, because it isn't one, but it is my favorite. This is something different, not something objectively better, but not something objectively worse either, just something different. And that something different had me in love. I love Assassin's Creed Odyssey, flaws and all, and it saddens me to think that there might not be another game in the series like it. This game has brought me countless memories and beautiful sights that I don't often see in many other games. This game is extremely special to me and to many others that are able to look past its shortcomings, and I believe that if you have the right expectations, this game can be to you what it is to me, a personal favorite. Thank you for watching.